I was 29 when my family gathered for the annual Anderson Family Investment Trust meeting, a long-standing ritual passed down through 3 generations. Every year, the men of the family convened in my grandfather's grand study, an oak panel room that smelled of cigars, old books, and self-importance, to talk about stock portfolios, market outlooks, and wealth preservation strategies. There was my father, of course, sitting at the head of the table like a monarch, Uncle Bob and Uncle Tom on either side, my older brother Marcus jotting notes to look involved, and my cousin Derek pretending to understand what was being said. 5 men in tailored suits, discussing money they had mostly inherited. And then there was me, Riley Anderson, the only woman in the room, seated by the window as a formality. My invitation was meant to be educational. Observe, listen, maybe learn something from the professionals. Markets have been volatile, my father announced, settling into my grandfather's leather chair as if it were a throne. But Anderson money stays strong. That's what separates us from the amateurs, discipline, strategy, and professional management. Uncle Bob nodded solemnly. Exactly. We don't panic like retail investors. We think generationally. I said nothing, just quietly sipped my coffee and watched them pat each other on the back. They had no idea that while they were relying on inherited wealth and overpaid advisors, I'd been building something entirely different, something of my own. Growing up, I'd watched men in my family treat investing like a sacred, male-only art form. The Anderson Family Investment Trust, valued at around $40 million, was established by my great-grandfather. For decades, my father and uncles congratulated themselves for managing it, though in truth, they didn't manage a thing. They simply paid Wellington Investment Management a 1.5% annual fee to do the work, while they held meetings and acted like masterminds. The women in the family were never included. Too complicated. Dad used to say, investing requires a certain kind of analytical mind. My mother handled groceries and household bills. My aunts oversaw the family's charitable giving. But the real money? That was men's business. At 16, I'd once asked why women weren't allowed to be part of the trust. My father had patted my head and smiled. Sweetheart, investing isn't really a woman's strength. You're better at creative things. Leave the financial strategies to us. So I stopped asking, and I started learning. I devoured every finance book in my dad's office, most of which were still crisp and unread despite his bragging. I studied economics in high school and majored in finance at college. My father approved, thinking I'd become a bank teller. Instead, I began trading. With just $3,000 saved from summer jobs, I opened a brokerage account during my senior year. I started small, learning through trial and error. Slowly, I discovered I had something rare, an instinct for market movement, patience for research, and nerves of steel. By 23, that $3,000 had grown to $45,000. By 25, it was $280,000. I worked as a financial analyst at a mid-sized investment firm, lived modestly, and invested aggressively. I caught the tech growth wave early, exited before corrections, and reinvested smartly. While my family's trust barely matched the S&P 500, I was beating it by 6 percentage points a year. By 27, my personal portfolio was worth $1.8 million. And that's when I stumbled upon something interesting about the family trust. The sacred, unchangeable Anderson Family Investment Trust was actually structured as a limited partnership with transferable shares. That meant ownership could legally be sold, gifted, or reassigned with proper paperwork. The men didn't realize it. They thought their stakes were locked in tradition. But here's how it really broke down. Dad, 35%. Uncle Bob, 30%. Uncle Tom, 20%. Marcus, 10%. Derek, 5%. So I started asking questions. Quietly, casually. Uncle Tom, how's your portfolio performing lately? Marcus, don't you think Wellington's fees are a little steep? Derek, do you ever check your statements? Their answers revealed everything. Uncle Tom was frustrated with underperformance. Marcus didn't like the fees. Derek? He barely cared. That's when I made my move. I approached Uncle Tom privately. I'll buy your 20% stake in the trust for $8.5 million. I told him, more than its fair value. He laughed at first, until I showed him my portfolio performance. 28% annual returns over 5 years, compared to Wellington's 12%. His curiosity turned to interest. "Why do you want it?" he asked. "Because," I said, meeting his gaze, "I can manage it better than Wellington, and it's time someone in this family actually did." When I was 29, my family gathered for our annual Anderson Family Investment Trust meeting, a tradition spanning 3 generations. Every year, the men of the family would meet in my grandfather's old study to discuss portfolios, market strategies, and how to preserve the fortune they'd inherited. My father, Uncle Bob, Uncle Tom, my older brother Marcus, and my cousin Derek. 5 men in expensive suits, talking about wealth they hadn't earned. I was invited out of courtesy. The young one expected to sit quietly and listen, but unlike them, I didn't just inherit money. I understood how to make it grow. Over time, I approached each family member individually. Marcus was easy. He wanted capital for a business venture and was willing to sell his share. Derek never cared much about investing. He was happy to cash out. Uncle Tom respected results. When he saw my track record, he made a calculated decision to sell. 18 months later, I controlled 65% of the Anderson Family Investment Trust. I had spent $22 million using leverage, calculated risk, and option strategies. The deals were structured through legal entities and processed quietly within the trust's framework, so neither my father nor Uncle Bob had any clue. The trust required annual shareholder meetings, and votes were weighted by ownership percentage. With my majority stake, I had complete control. I could fire management, restructure portfolios, make every decision, and I simply hadn't told them. That was 2 years ago. Since then, I've been running the trust from behind the scenes, through proxies and legal representatives. Every year, I sat in those meetings as an observer, smiling while Dad and Uncle Bob praised Wellington management for returns that I had generated. 16 months earlier, I'd fired Wellington and brought everything in-house, managing it through a registered investment advisor firm I created. The family's annual 1.5% fee vanished, and returns jumped from 12% to 23%. The trust grew from $40 million to $68 million, and still, my father believed Wellington was in charge. This year's meeting was held at Dad's house. 6 of us at the dining table. Dad had printed agendas like he was chairing a board meeting. "Let's begin," he announced. Wellington's Q4 report shows strong performance. We're up 14% this year. In reality, we were up 26%, but Dad was reading outdated reports from before I'd fired Wellington. "Excellent management," Uncle Bob agreed. "This is why we hire professionals. They understand complexities amateurs never will." I bit my lip to hide a smile. "Something amusing, Riley?" Dad asked, his tone sharp. "No, Dad, just listening." "You should take notes," he said smugly. "Someday you might understand enough to manage your own savings account, though best stick to index funds. Stock picking isn't for everyone." "I have some stocks," I said lightly. Marcus laughed. "What Apple and Google? That's not real investing." "I'm sure Riley does her best," Uncle Bob added. "But managing wealth like the Anderson Trust requires expertise, hedging, sector rotation, international diversification. It's complex. Very complex." Dad nodded. "That's why we rely on Wellington. They have analysts, researchers, traders, not something one person could ever replicate." I stayed quiet, sipping my coffee. Then Derek spoke. "Actually, I meant to mention, I sold my shares in the trust last year." The room froze. To Riley, Dad's head snapped toward him. "You what?" "I sold my 5% to Riley," Derek repeated. "She offered above market value, and I wanted the cash. It's in last year's filings." Dad turned to Uncle Tom. "Tom, you didn't—" "I did," Uncle Tom interrupted calmly. 18 months ago. She made a better offer than the trust's annual returns. "Marcus," Dad demanded. My brother shrugged. 10%. I needed capital for the restaurant. Riley paid cash. Dad turned to me. his expression tightening. You bought their shares? Yes. How much do you own? 65%. I said evenly. I control the Anderson Family Investment Trust. The silence was absolute. That's impossible, Uncle Bob sputtered. Tom's share alone was worth over $8 million. I spent $22 million total, I replied. All transactions are documented in the trust filings. You could have seen them if you'd ever checked. Where did you get $22 million? Dad demanded. I earned it. I started investing in college. $3,000. By 27, I'd grown it to $1.8 million. I leveraged that to acquire my majority stake. Not possible, Uncle Bob insisted. You were a financial analyst, middle income. You can't have. I was an analyst. I corrected. I quit 2 years ago to manage investments full-time. My personal portfolio is worth about $12 million. The trust, $68 million, of which I own 65%. So my net worth is roughly $56 million. Dad shook his head. The trust is worth $40 million. You're reading old numbers. I said, it was worth $40 million before I fired Wellington and optimized the strategy. It's now $68 million. Returns are 26% this year, not 14%. You fired Wellington? Uncle Bob's voice cracked. You can't just... I can, I said simply. As majority owner, I fired them 16 months ago and restructured the portfolio. The results speak for themselves. We've beaten their projections by 12 points. Dad pushed back his chair, pacing in disbelief. This is insane. You can't. You don't have the expertise. I smiled. Apparently I do. I'd spent years watching Wellington's analysts shuffle our portfolio like a deck of cards, chasing commissions instead of performance. I'd studied their moves, learned their patterns, and surpassed them. I understood investing better than my family ever did. A family that inherited wealth and then outsourced every decision while pretending to be financial geniuses. And I definitely had more expertise than the men who once told me to stick to a savings account. Uncle Bob had started to speak. This is why women shouldn't. Shouldn't what? I interrupted sharply. Shouldn't learn about investing, build wealth independently, question men when it comes to money. I leaned forward, calm but firm. I own 65% of this trust, Uncle Bob. That means I control it. My vote is the only one that matters. A knock came at the door. My father's housekeeper stepped in, followed by Martin Caldwell, the director from Wellington Investment Management. Martin, thank God you're here, Dad said, clearly relieved. There's been some sort of misunderstanding. Riley thinks she fired Wellington, but obviously... Actually, Mr. Anderson, Martin cut in awkwardly. Ms. Anderson did terminate our management contract 16 months ago. The room froze. I'm only here because you called asking about Q4 reports, Martin continued. I wanted to clarify that Wellington hasn't managed the Anderson Family Investment Trust since August 2 years ago. That's impossible, my father said weakly. I've been receiving quarterly reports from our registered advisor. I nodded. Those reports were from me. I took over management personally and continued sending updates for transparency. You never noticed they came from a different source. Martin pulled out a document. The termination was executed correctly by Ms. Anderson as majority shareholder. She has full authority to make management decisions. Wellington no longer has any involvement with the trust. But the returns, 14%, those were Wellington's numbers. Dad insisted. Martin shook his head. Those were our projections before the termination. We have no knowledge of actual performance since. 26%, I said evenly. That's our actual return this year. The trust grew from $40 million to $68 million in 18 months. No management fees. No cookie-cutter portfolios. Just results. Uncle Bob's face had gone pale. You've been managing $68 million? Yes, and I've done it better than the so-called professionals you insisted were essential. Dad turned to Martin, still trying to make sense of it all. How is this even legal? How could she just take over? She purchased her shares legally, Martin explained. The trust allows transfers. She now owns 65%, which makes her the controlling partner. Everything was done according to the documents. Dad's voice faltered. But she's a woman? I finished for him. Yes, a woman who owns and manages a $68 million portfolio. The same woman you told to play it safe with savings accounts. The same woman you excluded from every investment meeting because it was men's business. I smiled faintly. Turns out I'm better at men's business than the man. Martin made a quick exit, clearly eager to escape the tension. Silence filled the room. Finally, Uncle Tom spoke. For what it's worth, Riley, he said, I don't regret selling my shares to you. Their value's up 30% since you took over. That's better than Wellington ever managed. Thank you, Uncle Tom. Derek nodded. Same here. Your reports actually teach something. I've learned more about markets from your updates than I ever did from Wellington's recycled statements. Marcus added, Watching you run the trust has been inspiring. You're good at this, Riley. Really good. Dad stood by the window, still staring outside. When did you even learn all this? How did I not know? You didn't know because you never asked, I said softly. You assumed I couldn't handle it, because I'm your daughter. You shut me out, so I educated myself. You told me to play small, so I built a multi-million-dollar portfolio behind your back. His voice cracked. I was trying to protect you. From what? I asked. From success? From independence? You weren't protecting me, Dad. You were protecting your ego. The idea that your daughter might outperform you terrified you. So you dismissed it until you couldn't. Uncle Bob scrolled through files on his tablet, his expression tightening. You've changed everything, he muttered. This portfolio looks nothing like before. That's right, I replied. Wellington had you buried in overpriced mutual funds with ridiculous expense ratios. I shifted us into index funds and individual equities. Lower cost, higher control, better results. These tech holdings are risky, he said. They're also up 40%. Meanwhile, Wellington had you stuck in stagnant value stocks barely keeping up with inflation. I traded through 2 market corrections, sold high, bought low. That's called active management. Dad finally turned around. So what happens now? Now, I said, we vote. As majority shareholder, I propose the Anderson Family Investment Trust remain under my management. Uncle Tom, Derek, and Marcus raised their hands immediately. That's 65% in favor. I announced. Motion passed. Uncle Bob frowned. And if we want to sell our shares? I'll buy them. Fair market value. Your 35% combined is worth about $24 million right now. I'll raise the capital and consolidate control. Dad exchanged a long look with Uncle Bob. We'll think about it. Take your time, I said. Either way, I'll keep running the trust. The only decision left is whether you want to benefit from my management or bow out. The meeting ended in uneasy silence. Dad didn't say goodbye. Uncle Bob left quickly. But Uncle Tom, Derek, and Marcus lingered, eager to learn more. You really turned 3,000 into 12 million? Marcus asked, amazed. Over 11 years, I said, through compound growth, discipline, and actually knowing what I was buying. Nothing magic about it, just patience. Could you teach me? Derek asked. Actually, teach me, not just send reports? Of course, I said with a smile. Weeks later, word spread through the family. The women, especially, were curious. My mother called, pride warming her voice. I always knew you were smart, she said. I just didn't realize how smart. My aunts invited me to lunch, not for gossip this time, but for guidance on their own finances. And for the first time in the Anderson family, the next investment discussion wasn't led by the men. My female cousins had started asking me about investment courses. The fact that a woman in the family had built real wealth, not through inheritance, but skill, had changed something deep in their perception. About 6 weeks later, Dad called. Riley, can we talk in person? We met at a quiet coffee shop, neutral ground. He looked smaller somehow, older, weighed down. I've been going through the trust reports, he began. Actually reading them this time. Not just the summaries. Your analysis, it's exceptional. Honestly better than Wellington's team. I owe you an apology. He paused, stirring his coffee slowly. I underestimated you. Worse, I dismissed you. I told myself it was because I was protecting you, but the truth is I was threatened. The idea that you might actually be better at this than me, it hit my ego harder than I wanted to admit. I looked at him evenly. You built your identity around money you inherited and people you paid to manage it. That's not the same as building something. He flinched and nodded. You're right. I didn't build anything. I maintained appearances. You built skill, understanding, and results. You became what I only pretended to be. And instead of being proud, I tried to minimize you. That was wrong. Yes, I said quietly. It was. Can you forgive me? I thought about it. 30 years of dismissal condescension, being told to stay safe in savings accounts. All the years I spent proving myself in silence while being undermined in public. I can forgive you, I said at last, but things aren't going back to how they were. I'm not asking for permission anymore. I'm not waiting for approval. I'm managing the trust, with or without your comfort. He nodded slowly. I understand. And for what it's worth, Bob and I decided not to sell our shares. The results speak for themselves. We're staying in. Smart choice, I said. He smiled faintly. We'd like to learn, really learn this time, if you're willing to teach. I can do that, I said, but it starts with admitting you don't know as much as you thought you did. That's pretty clear by now, he said with a tired laugh. Then softer. I'm proud of you, Riley. I should have said that a long time ago. I'm proud of what you've built, of who you've become. I'm sorry it took me this long to see it. Thank you, Dad, I said quietly. That means something. Under my management, the trust continued to soar. Within 2 years, we'd grown from $40 million to $82 million. My personal portfolio hit $19 million. Altogether, I was now managing over $100 million in assets. The next annual meeting felt different. Dad asked me to lead it. You're the majority shareholder and the portfolio manager, he said. It's your meeting now. So I sat at the head of the table, my grandfather's old seat, and presented a report, the growth, the strategy, the outlook. Dad, Uncle Bob, Uncle Tom, Marcus, and Derek listened, truly listened. They asked real questions, took notes, engaged. At the end, I added one more thing. I'm proposing we open trust participation to all family members, regardless of gender. The women in this family deserve equal financial education and opportunity. Agreed. Uncle Tom said immediately. Marcus and Derek nodded. Dad looked at Uncle Bob. Fine, Uncle Bob grumbled, though I have a feeling most of them will outperform us. Probably, I said, smiling. The Anderson women have been underestimated for too long. Let's see what happens when they're given the same opportunity. After the meeting, as people filtered out, Dad stopped me. Your grandfather would have been proud, he said softly. He built this trust to be grown and strengthened by his descendants. You're the first one who's truly done that. He never excluded women, you know. That was your generation's invention. I reminded him. He chuckled ruefully. Fair point. We didn't improve anything. We added prejudice. Not exactly our best legacy. But at least we're learning now. Thanks to you. Driving home that evening, I thought about the journey. From the quiet girl in the corner to the one at the head of the table. From being told to stick to savings accounts, to managing $100 million in investments. From being dismissed as incapable to becoming the most capable investor in the family. The irony was perfect. The same men who once said finance was too complicated for women now depended on one to protect their wealth. They said I'd never owned stocks. I owned their portfolio. They said to leave it to professionals. I became one. They said I didn't have the analytical mindset. I was the only one who actually did. And now they were listening. Not because they'd suddenly evolved, but because I'd made it impossible to deny the numbers. Sometimes revenge isn't loud. It's quiet, precise, and undeniable. It's being so effective that even your critics have to admit you were right. It's watching them realize that their prejudice cost them more than pride. It cost them profit. That evening, My phone buzzed with a message from Mom. Your cousin Jenna wants to talk to you about investing. I told her, you're the family expert now. We're so proud of you. I smiled and texted back, happy to help, because that, not the money, not the power, was the real victory. Opening the door for the next generation of Anderson women who wouldn't have to fight so hard just to be taken seriously. I started with $3,000 and skepticism. I ended with $100 million and respect. The family that told me I'd never own stocks now calls me for financial advice. They told me to stick to savings accounts. I stuck to excellence instead. Turns out that pays better.